Snow fell like ash over the mountains, soft and relentless, the kind of snow that swallowed sound, memory, and time itself. The road to Silver Pines wound through the Smoky Mountains in silence, each turn a ghost of the lost. Audrey Lane drove with both hands tight on the wheel, her breath fogging the inside of the glass. In the back seat, two small German Shepherd pups, Ash and Rune, lay curled together in a warm crate, their fur twitching with every bump in the road. The tires crunched over frozen gravel as the SUV rolled to a stop in front of what was left of a cabin. It leaned slightly to one side, roof caved in at the corner, chimney split down the middle. Smoke stains clung to the logs like old bruises. Audrey stepped out. The cold bit through her gloves. She pulled her coat tighter and looked up at the house. So this was it, her inheritance. A black luxury SUV sat waiting nearby, headlights on. Two figures stood beside it, Gregory Lane, her late husband's older brother, and his wife Victoria. They looked out of place here, wrapped in city clothes too clean for the mud and snow. Gregory smirked as she approached, one hand tucked in his coat pocket, the other adjusting his tie like he was standing in a boardroom, not the woods. "Welcome home, Audrey," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "This is what Ethan left you." Audrey glanced at the cabin again, her face unreadable. "It's smaller than I imagined." Victoria's laugh was thin, almost polite. "It's symbolic, dear. The transfer was done legally. $1, just as Ethan wished." $1, Audrey repeated it quietly, as if testing the weight of it. Gregory shrugged. "A generous gesture, really. Keeps the family name clean. You know how the law can be." He handed her an envelope, crisp and white against the gray air. She didn't open it. "I suppose that's everything," Victoria said, brushing snow from her sleeve, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light. "You'll find it cozy once you get used to the rustic charm." Audrey looked at her for a long second. "Did you ever get used to yours?" Victoria's smile froze. Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, Audrey, you've been gone a long time. The family's moved on. Best thing you can do now is make peace with what's left." "What's left?" Audrey said. "Is this." He gave a slow nod, eyes flicking toward the crate in the back of her car. "And those at least you've got company. Dogs are loyal sometimes more than people." Victoria sighed, impatience cutting through her tone. "Gregory, it's freezing. Let's go." He offered Audrey a last glance, half pity, half satisfaction. "Good luck, Marine. You'll need it." The SUV's engine roared to life, tires spinning in the slush. Mud splashed up over her boots as they drove off, taillights vanishing into the storm. And then there was silence. Audrey stood alone, snow collecting on her shoulders. The wind pushed against her coat, whispering through the trees. She turned toward the cabin, the $1 inheritance, and for the first time in years, she had no orders, no uniform, no home, just this. Ash whined softly in the crate. Rune poured at the bars, eager to explore. Audrey set the crate down on the porch and unlatched it. The pups leaped out, sniffing the snow, tails high and uncertain. "Welcome home," she murmured. The porch creaked under her weight. She tried the door. It stuck at first, then gave way with a long, dry moan. The smell hit her immediately: dust, old smoke, and something colder, like wood that had forgotten warmth. She stepped inside. The light from outside followed her in, faint and silver. The room was nearly empty. One table, a broken chair, a fireplace full of blackened ash. Her boots left prints in the thin layer of frost on the floor. The wind slipped through a crack in the wall and brushed her cheek like a whisper. Audrey set her duffel bag down and crouched near the fireplace. A few damp logs sat in the corner. She arranged them carefully and struck a match, but the flame barely caught. The cold fought back, swallowing it whole. Ash barked once, startled by the echo. Rune pressed against Audrey's leg, shivering. She smiled faintly and ruffled his fur. "It's just the wind," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. On the mantel above the fireplace, a single nail stuck out from the wood. Audrey reached into her bag and pulled out a small photograph. Ethan, smiling in uniform, his arm around her. The edges were creased, the surface scratched, but it was all she had left of him. She hung it on the nail. The matchlight flickered across his face, across hers. Snow drifted through a broken window, landing on the floor like ash from a fire long dead. The sound of the storm grew louder, wrapping the cabin in a kind of muffled heartbeat. Audrey sat on the edge of the chair, elbows on her knees, staring at the cold hearth. $1. That was what her husband's life had come to in the eyes of his family. A token, a gesture, a way to wash their hands clean. But she had seen too much to believe in gestures. Outside, the forest groaned beneath the weight of snow. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled a lonely, hollow sound that faded into the wind. Ash and Rune curled near her boots, their tiny bodies trembling in sleep. Audrey leaned back, letting her eyes close for a moment. The air smelled of cold iron and wood smoke. It should have felt like an ending, but deep down, it didn't. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't name yet. When she finally stood, she looked at the photo once more. The fire still refused to catch. The cold held the room like a memory that wouldn't let go. Audrey stepped closer to the window. The SUV's tire tracks were already fading under fresh snow. Within an hour, it would be as if they'd never come. She pressed her hand against the glass, leaving a faint print that quickly frosted over. Behind her the fire hissed once and went out. In the silence that followed, the cabin seemed to breathe. The floorboards creaked softly under the shifting weight of the storm. Audrey turned toward the sound, her reflection lost in the darkness of the window. "Looks like it's
just us now," she whispered to the dogs. They lifted their heads but didn't move. She crossed the room, sat down by the cold hearth, and listened as the wind moved through the eaves. The house whispered something low and almost kind, like a voice from another time, and for the first time since she arrived, Audrey Lane allowed herself to whisper back.
Morning came without light, only a dull, gray haze that crept through the cracks and turned the snow outside into one endless sheet of white. Audrey woke to the sound of the wind moaning through the eaves. Her breath fogged in the air as she pushed herself up from the chair. The fire she had fought to start the night before was only a heap of black ash. Even the walls looked colder now, streaked with frost. She rubbed her hands together, the bones stiff from the chill, and stood. "All right," she muttered, voice rough. "Let's make this place livable." The two pups were already awake. Ash pawed at a pile of dust near the hearth. Rune trotted toward the door, ears pricked, nose twitching. Audrey smiled faintly. "You two are better soldiers than most I knew." She spent the morning cleaning, if it could be called that. The broom she found in a corner had lost half its bristles, and each stroke seemed to wake more dust than it court. Still, she worked. She gathered broken glass, patched holes with cloth, and stacked what dry wood she could find. By noon, the fire caught again. For the first time since she arrived, the cabin glowed with a little warmth. The orange light stretched across the floor, reaching for corners that had been dark for years. Audrey hung Ethan's photograph above the mantel. She had wiped the glass clean the night before, but a faint crack still split the image from corner to corner right through his smile. She stared at it for a long time. "I made it, Ethan," she said quietly. "You were right. It's colder up here than I remembered." The fire popped, as if answering. She sat back on the chair, watching the flames twist in the reflection of the photo. For a moment it felt like home. Then the wind howled again, long and sharp. Pushing through the seams of the door, the sound was almost human, a wail that seemed to circle the cabin before slipping away into the woods. The boards along the wall trembled. Rune barked once. Low. Ash followed, his tail rigid, eyes locked on the far side of the room. Audrey frowned. "What is it?" The dogs didn't move, their ears tilted forward, bodies tense. She followed their gaze to a spot near the center of the floor, where the wood was darker, older. Rune barked again, short and urgent. "Probably a mouse," she said, half to herself, "or the wind." But even as she said it, the hairs on her arms stood up. She knelt and pressed her palm to the floor. It was cold, colder than anywhere else in the cabin. Too cold. She could feel a faint vibration beneath the boards, a distant rhythm that didn't belong to wind or wood. Then it stopped. Ash tilted his head. Rune winced softly, unsure. Audrey exhaled. "You're both jumpy." She forced a small laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Guess we all are." She stood and stoked the fire, feeding it another piece of wood. The flames flared up, driving the shadows back for a while. By afternoon, the storm outside grew heavier. Snow pressed against the windows, coating the glass until the world beyond disappeared entirely. It was just her, the dogs, and the sound of the house shifting under its own age. She fixed herself a small meal, beans, canned soup, whatever she had left from the car, and sat near the fire to eat. The heat didn't last long. It never did. When night fell, the light faded quickly, swallowed by the storm. Audrey sat in the old chair, wrapped in a blanket, the photograph of Ethan blowing faintly above the mantel. The dogs lay beside her. Ash slept first, twitching in dreams. Rune stayed awake longer, eyes half open, his ears flicking toward the floor now and then. The fire died slowly. Audrey's eyes grew heavy. The warmth from the flames mixed with the soft rhythm of the storm outside, and for a brief, fragile moment, she forgot the cold. She drifted somewhere between memory and sleep, between the cabin and a desert halfway across the world, where the nights were just as long but the air burned instead of froze. In her dream, Ethan was still alive. He was laughing, holding a map, pointing at something she couldn't see. The sound of his voice was almost clear, almost enough. Then a noise pulled her back, a low, drawn-out creak like something shifting under her feet. She opened her eyes. The fire was out, only embers glowed faintly in the dark. The sound came again, louder this time. The floor beneath her chair moved, just slightly, like a long breath drawn through the cracks. She froze. The dogs were awake, both standing now, staring at the floor. Rune growled deep in his throat. Ash's ears flattened. The sound came again, a faint, steady pulse beneath the boards, rising and falling like lungs. Audrey's voice was barely a whisper. What the hell? She knelt, pressing her palm to the floor. The wood was warm now, not cold. It trembled against her skin. Rune barked once, sharp and scared. Audrey stood abruptly, heart pounding. The air in the cabin had changed thicker somehow, heavy with something unseen. She reached for a flashlight but stopped halfway. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, faintly, almost tenderly, the boards exhaled. The room creaked as if it had heard her heartbeat. The fire hissed, though it was long dead. Audrey stepped back toward the chair, her breath fogging the air. She looked around the room, every shadow now sharper, deeper. The sound was gone, but the house didn't feel still. It felt alive. She sat again, refusing to show fear to no one but herself. "It's just the wind," she whispered. "Old houses make noise." The words didn't sound convincing, not even to her. Outside, the storm howled harder, beating at the windows like fists. Snow poured through the crack beneath the door, white against the dark. Rune curled beside her boots. Ash settled near the hearth, his eyes never leaving the floor. Audrey leaned her head back, watching the photograph of Ethan through half-closed eyes. His smile looked different in the flicker of dying light, softer, sadder. She pulled the blanket tighter and let exhaustion take her. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, she heard it once more, so faint she might have imagined it. A sound beneath the boards. A slow, hollow sigh. The floor breathing in, the floor breathing out. And somewhere in the cold between waking and dream, Audrey Lane whispered the words to herself before sleep claimed her. "The floor is breathing." The storm never really stopped that night. It just changed its rhythm, softer, almost like breathing. When Audrey opened her eyes again, the fire had burned down to a dull orange glow, and the house was whispering to itself. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls, carrying thin flakes of snow that melted before they reached the floor. Ash and Rune were already awake, both standing near the center of the room. Their Bodhi's stiff eyes locked on the same spot, the same patch of floor they had growled at before. Audrey rubbed her eyes. "What is it now?" Her voice sounded small in the cold air. Rune barked once, sharp and low. Ash took a step back, tail low but alert. Then she heard it, a faint sound, not quite a creak, not quite a sigh. It came from beneath the boards, a hollow rhythm, almost like something breathing below her feet. She crouched down and ran her fingers over the wood. That was when she saw it, a thin, clean line along one of the planks. Too straight to be too precise to be natural. Someone had cut it. Her pulse quickened. She fetched her flashlight and knife from the table. The blade slipped into the seam easily, as if it had been waiting there for years. With a careful push, she pried up the board. It gave a slow, aching groan, and cold air rushed upward, brushing her face like the exhale of a grave. Beneath was darkness and a narrow wooden staircase descending into it. For a long moment, she didn't move. The dog stayed behind her, restless but silent. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing up from below, patient and heavy. Audrey adjusted her grip on the flashlight. "Stay," she whispered to the dogs. Then she started down the steps. Each board creaked under her boots. The air grew colder the lower she went, thick with the smell of damp earth and metal. Her breath came out in pale clouds, and frost clung to the rough wooden beams. At the bottom, her light landed on a shape half buried in debris, a metal box, square and solid, its surface edged with faint symbols. She wiped the frost away. There it was, the eagle and anchor, the mark of the Marines. Her throat tightened. Ethan. The box was heavier than it looked, rusted at the corners but sealed tight. She brushed away the dust and found the latch, one she recognized. It was his. She opened it with both hands, and the sound that followed was a brittle click, like something breaking free after too long. Inside was a folded oilcloth and, resting on top, a letter sealed with wax that had cracked over time. Her heart stopped for a second when she saw the handwriting. His handwriting. The letters were heavy, deliberate, pressed too deep into the paper, just the way he always wrote when he was tired. She opened it slowly. "If you're reading this, it means they did what they planned." Her breath caught. "Don't trust anyone from the family, not even the ones who call themselves blood. They know what they took, and they'll do worse to keep it buried. The next lines had blurred with water or tears. She could still make out fragments. The truth inheritance Hayes Manor where the snow never melts. At the bottom, his name, Ethan Lane. Her hand trembled. The sound of the storm above faded. There was only the low hum of the house breathing around her, as if it too was listening. She reached into the box again and found a folded map. The paper was old, edges burned, but the ink was clear, a rough outline of the valley, the river, the forest ruins, and there a small red X near the northern ridge. Next to it, a single word, Hayes Manor. The name stirred something cold in her memory. The Lane estate long abandoned, rumored to have burned in a winter fire decades ago. No one went there anymore, but Ethan had drawn it, marked it, hidden it here. Why? She rose to her feet and looked up toward the faint light from above. For a second, she thought she saw movement through the cracks of the floor, something passing between her and the firelight. But when she blinked it was gone. The dogs barked from upstairs, loud and sharp. She folded the letter and the map into her jacket and climbed the stairs, the cold chasing her every step. Back in the cabin, the air felt heavier, thicker. The fire was nearly out, and the window panes had grown white with frost. Audrey pushed the board back into place, but it no longer fit perfectly. It left a small gap, just wide enough for the cold to breathe through. Ash and Rune circled near the door, uneasy. She set the letter on the table beside Ethan's photograph. His smile stared back at her through the cracked glass. Still gentle, still trusting. "What were you doing, Ethan?" she whispered. "What did you find?" The only answer was the soft pop of a dying ember and the sigh of wind through the cracks. Audrey sat by the fire and unfolded the map again. Her eyes traced the ridges, the frozen lake, the red X. The path looked long, deep through the snowbound forest, but it was a start, a clue he'd left just for her. The words from the letter echoed in her mind, "Where the snow never melts." Rune rested his head on her knee. Ash lay by the hearth, watching the shadows dance across the floor. Outside the storm built again, heavier than before. The windows trembled. Snow pressed against the glass like a white tide. Audrey looked at the map one last time, then at the floorboard she had opened. It was quiet now, still, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the silence wasn't empty. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The house creaked once, deep and low, almost like a sigh, and in the darkness below, faint and distant, something whispered her name. Audrey. The sound was so soft she almost convinced herself it wasn't real. But the dogs lifted their heads, ears pointed toward the floor. She opened her eyes and looked at them. No one moved. The fire went out. The storm swallowed the cabin whole, and somewhere deep beneath her feet, the whisper came again. Morning returned pale and silent. The storm had not stopped, only softened its fury, replaced by a slow, endless drift of snow that blanketed everything in white. Audrey sat by the small table, the letter unfolded in her hands. The edges were frayed, the ink blurred by time, but she could still read every word. Ethan's handwriting was steady, neat, almost a calm for what it said. She read it again, slowly. "If anything happens to me, don't come here. Audrey, promise me. They won't forgive what I've done. Not then. Not ever." Her fingers tightened around the page. She had found it under the floorboard the night before, sealed in a tin box along with a photo of them taken in the old barracks, both younger, both smiling in the desert light. She had almost forgotten that smile. The fire crackled faintly, just enough to paint a soft glow over the paper. Her mind drifted back to that last day, the one she had tried so hard to bury. It had been summer then, blinding heat, sand shimmering under the afternoon sun. The airbase was alive with engines and shouting and dust. She remembered Ethan's hand on her shoulder, firm but shaking slightly. "You shouldn't be here," he'd said. Audrey had smirked, though her throat was tight, and missed saying goodbye. "Not a chance." Ethan's eyes softened. "You always do what you shouldn't. Someone has to keep you honest." He laughed quietly, but there was something behind it, something that wasn't laughter at all. He looked away, toward the hangars, where his team waited. "Listen," he said finally, voice lower now. "If things go wrong, you know my family won't. I don't care what they think." She cut in. He smiled sadly. "I know. That's what scares them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his dog tag, pressing it into her palm. "Keep it safe, and don't come looking if I don't come back." She had wanted to say something, anything, but the words had caught in her throat. He kissed her then, quickly, desperately, as if the world might end before he let go. And when he did let go, he didn't look back. The sound of the engines had drowned everything else. Audrey blinked, pulling herself back to the present. Her breath trembled in the cold air. She looked down at the letter again, reading the last line. "I did what I had to do for us. For us," she whispered, "and it got you killed." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket. Her face was pale, her eyes dry. Whatever grief had been there was no longer soft, it had turned into something else. Resolve. She stood and stared at the window, where frost had formed strange branching patterns like veins spreading across glass. The world outside was white and still. A family that doesn't forgive, she murmured, then I'll make them remember. Ash and Rune stirred from where they lay near the fire. Rune tilted his head, sensing the shift in her tone. Ash padded closer, tail low but steady. Audrey knelt between them, resting her hands on their fur. We'll find the truth, she said quietly, whatever it takes. Outside, the wind changed. The sound was different now, not just the sigh of snow through trees, but something heavier, slower. Rune's ears twitched. Ash growled low, the sound rumbling in his chest. What is it? Audrey whispered. The dogs moved to the window, paused against the wooden sill. Their bodies stiffened. Ash barked once, sharp and warning. Rune followed, louder, teeth bared. Audrey's heart pounded. She crossed the room and pulled the curtain aside. At first, she saw nothing but snow. The storm had thickened again, turning the forest into a blur of white and shadow. But then movement. Someone was out there. A dark figure near the tree line, half hidden behind a drift of snow. Too still to be wind. Too real to be a trick of her eyes. She froze, breath shallow. The figure didn't move, didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. Ash barked again, furious this time. The shape shifted slightly, then disappeared, swallowed by the snow. Audrey stared into the white emptiness long after it was gone. Her reflection looked back at her in the frost-covered glass, tired eyes, clenched jaw, a woman too far from fear to turn away now. She let the curtain fall and stepped back. Someone's watching us, she said softly. Rune growled again, pacing near the door. Let them watch, she whispered. They'll see what's coming. She reached for Ethan's photo above the mantel, tracing her fingers along the cracked glass. For the first time, she didn't feel the ache of loss, only the steady pulse of purpose. He had tried to protect her, but he had also left her a trail, a letter, a secret, a reason to fight. Outside, the snow thickened, falling faster, heavier. The wind carried faint echoes through the forest, sounds that might have been branches breaking or footsteps retreating. Audrey added another log to the fire. The flames rose, painting the cabin in shifting gold and shadow. Ash lay by the door, eyes open. Rune sat beside her, boots, every muscle tense. Audrey didn't look at them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the window, where frost slowly crept across the glass like an unseen hand. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, someone knew what happened to Ethan Lane, and she was going to find them, even if it meant waking every ghost buried under this snow. The snow hadn't stopped for 3 days. It fell in waves, silent, patient, endless. Each morning, Audrey woke to find the world buried a little deeper, as if the forest were trying to erase itself. The fire had burned low when she heard the sound of an engine, not the distant hum of a snowplow or the echo of a truck passing through town. No, this one was close, too close. She stepped to the window. A dark SUV rolled up the narrow road, tires crunching through ice, the same kind that had left her here weeks ago. Gregory Lane stepped out first. His coat was black, his scarf an expensive gray. He looked like he'd stepped out of another world, a warm one, a clean one, untouched by the cold she was standing in. Ash and Rune stiffened at her side, a low growl rising between them. It's all right, Audrey murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Let's see what the snake wants. She opened the door before he could knock. The cold rushed in, shocked as broken glass. Gregory, she said flatly. Sister-in-law. His smile didn't reach his eyes. May I come in? She stepped aside, not because she wanted to, but because she wanted to see what he'd do when he crossed that threshold. He brushed a speck of snow from his sleeve, pretending to look around the cabin. Still standing, he said, didn't think this old place would last the winter. It's holding up better than some people I know. Gregory chuckled softly, the kind of sound that tried to pass for charm but reeked of calculation. Still got that sharp tongue. Ethan used to say you're too much soldier for a small-town girl. Ethan said a lot of things. He paused at that, just for a heartbeat. Then his expression settled back into that polished calm he wore like armor. I came to check on you, he said. We're all concerned. She raised an eyebrow. Concerned. Silver Pines can be harsh this time of year. A woman, alone. Out here it's not safe. Her jaw tightened. You mean it's not safe for you if I start asking questions? His eyes met hers, and for the first time, the civility cracked. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do, she said, stepping closer. Ethan's letter, the map, the box under the floor. You thought you could bury him and his truth in this snow, but you didn't bury me." Gregory's smile returned tight, rehearsed, almost pitiful. "You've been through a lot. I'd hate to see grief turn into delusion. Some things are better left untouched. Audrey, old wounds, family matters, they only bring more pain." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Take my advice. Don't dig where there's nothing left to find." Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked out into the storm. The SUV door slammed a moment later. The sound of the engine faded down the mountain road until only the wind remained. Ash barked once, sharp and angry. "I know," she said, closing the door. "He's lying." That night, the world outside turned black and white, the trees painted in frost, the sky thick with cloud. Audrey sat by the window with the rifle across her lap, the fire burning low. She couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the tree line. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Every branch tapping the glass felt deliberate. Ash's ears twitched first. Rune lifted his head, staring toward the back wall. Then came the sound, a soft creak, almost beneath hearing, followed by the delicate shatter of glass. The back window. Audrey moved before she thought. Years of training taking over. She slipped into the dark, rifle ready. Steps light against the creaking floor. The dogs flanked her instinctively. One left, one right. Another sound, boots scuffing wood. Someone was inside. She reached the kitchen doorway and caught a glimpse of figure, tall, masked, hunched low as he moved toward the main room. His breath came in clouds through the slit of his mask. Audrey waited until he passed the doorway. Then she struck. The butt of the rifle came down hard across his arm. The intruder grunted, staggered, tried to swing around, but she was already on him, one hand at his throat, the other twisting his wrist until the knife he carried clattered to the floor. They crashed against the table. The dogs barked, wild and fierce, circling. Audrey pressed him down, knee in his chest, eyes like ice. "Who sent you?" He didn't answer, just struggled and hissed through the mask. She ripped it off. He was young, barely more than a kid, face red from the cold, eyes wide with fear. "Who sent you?" she repeated. He hesitated, then muttered, I don't know names. Just money, said to scare you off. Make sure you stop digging." "Gregory." He said nothing, but his eyes flicked just once and that was enough. Audrey let go, standing over him. "Get out," she said. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrists. "You're crazy. Lady maybe," she said, "but I'm alive. Tell your employer I plan to stay that way." The kid bolted through the broken window into the night. She stood there for a long time after he was gone, the wind pouring in through the shattered frame. Ash sniffed at the air. Rune pressed against her leg, trembling slightly. She knelt and stroked their fur. "They're afraid," she whispered. "That's why they sent him." The cabin was silent again, except for the sound of fire and the low moan of the storm. Audrey walked to the window, her reflection faint in the frost. The forest beyond was nothing but black trunks and drifting snow, beautiful and merciless. "They're watching," she said quietly. "But so am I." She turned off the lamp, letting the dark swallow the room. Only the faint orange of the embers remained, glowing like eyes in the night. Outside, the snow kept falling. Somewhere beyond that white veil, men like Gregory Lane were beginning to realize the woman they'd tried to bury had started to dig, and she would not stop until every secret came to light. The forest swallowed the road long before dawn. Snow drifted in soft sheets across the ground, muffling everything, the crunch of her boots, the quiet panting of Ash and Rune, the beat of her own pulse. The map from Ethan's letter was clutched in a gloved hand, its edges damp from melted frost. It had taken her nearly an hour to find the narrow trail that curved north, away from Silver Pines. Ethan had marked it with a single line of ink and one phrase written in the margin, "Where the snow never melts." Now, as the wind thickened and the trees grew heavy with ice, she understood what he meant. The air here didn't move right, it was still and pale, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The mist hung low between the branches, glowing faintly in the light of her lantern. Ash trotted ahead, his nose to the ground. Rune stayed close behind, more cautious, tail stiff, every sense alert. Audrey whispered, "Easy, we're almost there." And then she saw what was left of the Lane estate. The gates rose out of the snow like the bones of a giant, two rattan doors, bent and rusted, chained together by years of neglect. Beyond them, she could just make out the shape of the manor, a silhouette of stone and shadow, the roofline jagged against a pale sky. She pushed through the gate. It groaned open with a sound that felt too alive. The courtyard was a graveyard of the family's history, statues broken at the waist, wings snapped from angels, a fountain frozen solid. The face of the marble lion beside the steps had cracked in two. one eye missing, the other staring blankly through a crust of ice. The wind whispered through the arches. It almost sounded like voices. Audrey climbed the front steps. The dogs closed on her heels. She tried the handle. It gave ease, as if someone had been here before her. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The grand hall stretched wide. Pillars of carved oak now splintered and gray. Chandeliers hung above, their crystals draped with cobwebs like frozen tears. A long carpet, once red, now muted to the color of dried rust, led to a staircase that split in two. She stopped halfway to take it in. "This is what they were so desperate to hide," she murmured. Rune sniffed the air and let out a low growl. Audrey followed his gaze toward the far end of the hall, where a door hung slightly ajar. Behind it, a narrow stairway led downward. The map in her hand trembled. She didn't need to look at it again. She knew this was where Ethan wanted her to go. She took a deep breath, flicked on her flashlight, and descended. The basement smelled of rust and forgotten rain. Water dripped steadily from somewhere unseen, echoing like a heartbeat. Ash pressed close to her leg. Rune went ahead, his paws silent on the cold concrete. The beam of her light swept over crates, dust-choked furniture, the outlines of old portraits leaning face down against the wall. Then, in the far corner, she saw a large safe built into the stone itself. Its dials streaked with age and frost. Her heart skipped. Ethan had worked with her once on decoding Field Lock's old military security systems. He used to joke that no safe was safe enough when a Marine wanted it open. She knelt, wiped her glove across the cold steel, and whispered, "Let's see if you left me a clue." The numbers on the dial were faint, but she could make out a small etching beside them, a triangle with 3 lines inside. It was a unit symbol, Ethan's unit. Her breath caught. She turned the dial, right, right again. The sound of the final click was like a pulse returning to life. The door creaked open. Inside were stacks of old ledgers, sealed envelopes, and a thick folder marked with a family crest. Audrey pulled it out and laid it on the ground. When she opened it, the world seemed to stop. There were financial records, transfers, offshore accounts, signatures forged. A second envelope contained a photocopy of a will. Ethan's handwriting on the bottom corner read, "The real one is buried deeper." Beneath that, a single sheet of paper, the original will. She read it slowly, her breath clouding over the ink. Ethan wasn't meant to inherit just the small cabin. The manor, the land, and the trust, all of it had been his by right, and by marriage, hers. But Gregory and Victoria had falsified documents, diverted assets, and erased proof of lineage. Her chest tightened as the realization sank in. He hadn't died in an accident. He'd found this, and they'd silenced him for it. She knelt there for a long time. The papers spread around her like fragments of truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have come sooner." Ash pressed his head against her arm. Rune whined softly, pooing at the floor. Audrey gathered the evidence, tucked the will and files into her pack, and turned to leave. That was when she saw it light, faint, flickering, cutting through the gaps in the boarded windows upstairs. Headlights. Her pulse surged. She snapped off the flashlight and crouched low, peering up the stairwell. The distant hum of an engine rolled through the silence. Then came voices. 2, maybe 3. "She's here." The dogs found tracks. Audrey's grip tightened on her pack. She looked at Ash and Rune. They were silent now, waiting for her command. "Back door," she whispered. They moved together through the shadows, her boots soft against the cold floor. The voices grew louder, closer, metal scraping against metal as someone forced the front door open. Light spilled down the staircase, pale and violent. Audrey slipped through a side passage and into the night air. The cold hit her lungs like fire. She ran, low and fast, the dogs at her sides, snow bursting underfoot. Behind her, the manor glowed faintly through the mist, headlights sweeping across broken statues, the ghosts of the Lane family watching from their marble tombs. When she reached the tree line, she turned back once. The house stood in silence again, swallowed by fog. Her breath came hard and fast. In her pack, the papers rustled softly. The truth was in her hands now, the proof they'd killed to hide. And for the first time since Ethan's death, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. The storm came without warning. Wind screamed through the broken arches of the Lane estate as Audrey shoved the old folder into her coat. Snow whipped across the courtyard, erasing her footprints before they could settle. Ash barked once, sharp and urgent, Rune's ears flattened at low, instinctive growl rumbling from his chest. She knew before she saw it. Headlights cut through the curtain of white, 2 beams slicing across the ruins like knives. Engines roared, tires crunched over ice. They'd found her. Gregory's voice echoed faintly through the storm. "Audrey." Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She ducked behind a fallen column, heart hammering against her ribs. The cold bit into her wounded shoulder from earlier where the first bullet had grazed her during the estate search. Blood had frozen into her sleeve, stiff and dark. She pressed her hand against it and breathed through the pain. Ash winced softly beside her. Rune's growl deepened, body tense. Waiting for her command. Stay close, she whispered. We move on my mark. Another shout closer this time. Gregory's men were spreading out, flashlights cutting arcs through the blizzard. The storm masked sound and sight alike, but the snow betrayed movement every step. Every shadow etched against the white world. Audrey drew the small handgun from her belt. The metal burned her bare palm, cold as death. This was no longer about survival. It was about truth and what Ethan had died for. She moved. Gunfire erupted behind her. Sharp and brief. She threw herself into the snow, rolled, and fired 2 shots toward the nearest light. A scream, then silence. Ash darted forward, slamming into a man's legs. Jaws clamping onto his coat, Rune leapt after him, dragging another to the ground. Hold, she shouted. The dogs obeyed instantly, retreating to her side. She didn't need more blood tonight. Through the chaos, she saw him, Gregory, tall and still, standing near the main gate with his overcoat billowing like the shadow of a crow. His eyes met hers through the storm, cold, polished, and merciless. You should have stayed away, he said. His voice was almost lost in the wind. He should have told the truth, she answered. He gave a bitter smile. Ethan was weak. He didn't understand what the family built. She fired not at him, but at the post beside him. Wood splintered. Gregory flinched. That was all she needed. Audrey turned and ran, clutching the folder to her chest. Bullets chased her through the night. Snow exploded at her feet. The trees loomed ahead, dark, skeletal shapes swaying under the weight of the storm. Ash ran ahead, clearing the path, barking warnings. Rune stayed behind her, watching their flank. Pain burned through her arm with every step. The storm blurred the world into shades of white and gray. Her breath came in harsh bursts, fogging the air. Then a crash. A figure lunged from the right. She swung the butt of her gun, striking hard. The man fell, groaning. Audrey stumbled past him, half running, half sliding down a slope. Her boots hit ice. She fell to her knees, gasping. Somewhere behind she heard Gregory shouting again, rage cutting through the wind. Find her, she has the files. The folder, Ethan's last truth pressed against her heart. She couldn't lose it. She crawled beneath a fallen pine, dragging herself and the dogs into the hollow space below. The air was tight, filled with frost and the smell of pine resin. She pressed her bleeding shoulder against the bark, biting back a cry. Outside, the world was fire and snow. From the estate's direction, an orange glow rose, dim at first, then brighter. Flickering through the storm like a dying sun, flames licked at the roof, devouring the old mansion that had held the Lane family's secrets for decades. The estate was burning, and with it, the last mask of their empire. Ashwind, curling against her lap. Rune licked the blood from her fingers. It's okay, she whispered, voice trembling. We're still here. The warmth of the dogs was the only thing that kept her from freezing completely. She pulled her coat tighter and stared at the fire until her vision blurred. For a moment, she saw Ethan there standing in the snow as he once did, face lit by the flames, that gentle smile playing on his lips. You'll know what to do when the time comes, he had told her once. She hadn't understood then. Now she did. The truth was never meant to stay buried. Audrey reached into her pocket and pulled out the small metal drive, the data she had taken from the safe. Hidden beneath false ledgers and burned pages, inside it lay proof of Gregory's fraud, the company's money laundering, and Ethan's attempt to expose it all. Her hands shook as she closed her fist around it. You died for this, she whispered, but I'll finish it. The storm began to ease. Snowflakes drifted more gently now, settling onto her hair and the dog's fur. The forest fell quiet again, save for the distant crackle of fire and the soft rhythm of breath beside her. Audrey built a small fire from fallen branches. Its light flickered weakly, barely enough to fight the darkness. She wrapped her scarf tighter and leaned back against the log. Ash rested his head on her knee. Rune stretched beside the flames, eyes half closed. Her body ached, but her spirit burned steadier than ever. The fear had gone, replaced by something colder and sharper resolve. Tomorrow she would move again, to the town, to the law, to anyone who would listen. But tonight, under the fading storm, she sat in silence, watching the snow melt on her blood-stained hands. She understood the past had finally begun to burn away, and from its ashes, she would carve her own justice. The town of Silver Pines was almost unrecognizable beneath the morning frost. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world carved in ice and silence. Sunlight glimmered on rooftops like shards of broken glass, and the roads were little more than white veins through the quiet. Audrey's breath clouded in front of her as she parked the old pickup outside a narrow brick building. The sign above the door read, Helen Crawford, Attorney at Law. She sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the thick layers of her coat, and her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Ash and Rune shifted in the back seat, restless but obedient, watching her with the patience of soldiers who understood the weight of silence. "This is it," she murmured, reaching back to touch them both. "No more running." She stepped out, boots crunching against the ice. The bell above the office door jangled faintly as she entered. The warmth inside was almost shocking. It smelled of paper, coffee, and faint traces of cedar. Shelves lined with law books towered behind a wooden desk, and behind it sat a woman in her 50s, sharp eyes, silver-streaked hair neatly tied back. Helen Crawford looked up from her files, a surprise flashing across her face. "Mrs. Lane," she said, rising. "My God, we all thought you left the state." Audrey pulled down her hood, the frost melting on her cheeks. "Not yet," she said quietly. "I need your help." Helen gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Sit down. You look like you've been through hell." "I have," Audrey replied, lowering herself slowly. Wincing as the wound in her shoulder pulled, she placed a thick envelope of documents on the desk between them, the folder Ethan had hidden, the one she had bled for. Helen eyed it, her expression tightening. "What is this?" "Proof," Audrey said, "of what really happened to Ethan." Helen put on her glasses, flipping through the papers, her brows furrowed as she read bank transfers, false ledgers, shell companies under Gregory's name, and at the bottom, a digital drive labeled state_records_truth. This could blow the entire Lane Corporation apart, Helen whispered. "But if this is true, it also proves Ethan was right. He tried to expose them." Audrey nodded once, eyes fixed on the floor. "And they killed him for it." For a long moment, there was only the soft rustle of paper. Helen leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You understand what this means, don't you? If we reopen the estate, challenge the will, and accuse Gregory of fraud, you'll be facing the entire Lane family in court." Audrey looked up. Her gaze was steady, the same calm that came before a storm. "I didn't come here to beg for fairness," she said. "I came to make sure they can't bury the truth again." Helen studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right, I'll draft a petition. We'll file for a formal reopening of Ethan's estate and attach the financial fraud evidence." "But Audrey," she paused, lowering her voice. "You need to understand something. These people, they don't lose. They'll threaten you, smear your name, maybe worse." Audrey's lips curved into something between a smile and a scar. "I've faced men with rifles and bombs," she said. "Why should I fear men who hide behind paper?" Ellen froze, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You really are his wife?" For the first time in days, something warm flickered in Audrey's chest, not joy, not peace, but a fragile kind of strength. Helen continued working, typing briskly as the printer hummed to life. Pages slid out one by one: official forms, affidavits, evidence lists. "We'll need to contact a notary, and someone from the county courthouse," she said, glancing up. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" Audrey hesitated. "The cabin," Helen frowned. "That's the first place they'll look. Don't go back there until we file. Stay in town. There's an inn 2 blocks down." Audrey nodded silently. The sound of the printer filled the space again, rhythmic and steady. For a while, it was almost peaceful to women working quietly against the weight of a corrupt legacy. When Helen finally gathered the papers into a neat stack, she looked at Audrey with something close to respect. "I'll file this tomorrow morning," she said, "and I'll contact the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges. Once this is public, they won't be able to silence it." Audrey met her gaze. "Good." But before she could stand, Helen leaned forward slightly. "One more thing," she said softly. "Ethan came to me the week before he died. He said if anything happened to him, you'd come here. He told me. She's stronger than she knows." The words struck deep. Audrey felt something twist in her chest, grief and pride, tangled together like roots under snow. She blinked hard and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Helen gave a faint smile. "He believed in you." "So do I." Audrey rose, gathering the coat around her shoulders. Ash and Rune were waiting by the door, their silhouettes framed against the sunlight spilling through frosted glass. She reached down, brushing her fingers through their fur. Outside, the world gleamed white and still, as if holding its breath. She could feel eyes on her from somewhere across the street, maybe Gregory's men, maybe just the weight of memory. But this time, she didn't flinch. The fight had changed. No more running through the snow, No more hiding from ghosts. Now, every step would leave a mark in ink. In law. In truth, as she stepped out into the cold, she looked back once more. Helen stood at the window, watching her with that same quiet resolve. The frost on the glass caught the light, scattering it into tiny prisms like 1,000 small truths breaking through the ice. And as Audrey walked down the street, the words echoed in her mind. I've never feared the ones with guns, so why should I fear the ones with paper? The snow crunched beneath her boots. For the first time since Ethan's death, the weight she carried didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like purpose. Winter returned to Silver Pines with a kind of merciless beauty. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a gray monolith against the white horizon. Reporters clustered at its steps like crows, waiting for a storm to break. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions through the cold, and breath turned to mist in the air. Audrey Lane walked up those steps without a word. Her coat was black, simple, military. The only movement came from the 2 dogs trotting close behind her, Ash and Rune, silent, disciplined, their fur dusted with snow. Inside, the courtroom was warm but tense. Wooden benches were packed with journalists, lawyers, and curious townsfolk who had followed every whisper of the Lane family scandal. The murmur of voices filled the air until the bailiff struck the gavel. All rise. The court is now in session. Judge Miriam Kella, stern and composed, took her seat. Helen Crawford stood beside Audrey at the plaintiff's table, sacks of documents neatly arranged in front of her. Across the aisle, Gregory and Victoria sat shoulder to shoulder, though they looked anything but united. Gregory's jaw was set hard, his knuckles white. Victoria's hands trembled as she clutched a handkerchief, mascara already smudged. The judge's voice echoed through the room. This hearing concerns the estate of the late Ethan Lane, regarding allegations of fraud, will forgery, and unlawful transfer of property. Helen rose first, her tone calm and deliberate. Your Honor, we present verified DNA evidence confirming Ethan Lane's sole lineage and his direct inheritance rights. We also submit the original will, recovered from the Lane Manor by Mrs. Audrey Lane, which was concealed following Mr. Lane's death. She placed the old, worn envelope on the evidence table. The court officer took it, handed it to the clerk, and the sound of unfolding papers seemed to echo louder than any gabble. The judge read silently for several moments. Then her eyes lifted toward Gregory. Mr. Lane, do you dispute the authenticity of this document? Gregory's lawyer, a tall man in a gray suit, cleared his throat. Rana, the defense maintains that this so-called original is a fabrication, planted by enough. Judge Keller interrupted. The document has been verified by forensic examination and matches the handwriting and ink composition from the date of death. Continue, Miss Crawford. Helen gave a brief nod, her eyes glinting with quiet triumph. The forged will, which Gregory and Victoria submitted, transferred all assets to them under the pretense of guardianship. However, the true will, this one, leaves everything to Ethan's spouse, Mrs. Audrey Lane, including the family estate, corporate shares, and trust holdings. A ripple spread through the room. Cameras clicked furiously. Gregory's jaw tightened. That woman never belonged in this family. He hissed under his breath. But Audrey heard it. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on the judge. Calm and steady as ice. Helen continued, her voice like a blade cutting through the noise. And beyond property, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Gregory Gray Lane and Mrs. Victoria Lane concealed critical information regarding Ethan's death. Information that would have changed the investigation's outcome. Gasps filled the air. Victoria shook her head, whispering frantically, Greg, tell them it's not true. Gregory's lawyer tried to object, but Helen pressed forward. Financial records, recovered from the Lane estate's lower vault, show substantial transfers to a private security contractor 2 days before Ethan's accident, the same contractor whose man was found trespassing on Mrs. Lane's property just last week. Judge Keller's gaze hardened. That will be investigated separately. For now, this court recognizes clear evidence of fraud. Gregory's face drained of color. Victoria broke into quiet sobs, her shoulders shaking. The judge spoke again, firm and final. It is the decision of this court that the will submitted by the defendants is hereby declared invalid. The rightful beneficiary of Ethan Lane's estate, in accordance with the verified testament, is Audrey Lane. All holdings and properties shall be restored to her name effective immediately. The gavel struck once. The sound cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the courtroom clock. Then, as the weight of it settled, Gregory slumped back in his chair, staring at nothing. His eyes, once sharp and full of disdain, were hollow, the look of a man who had finally seen the end of his own shadow. Victoria wept openly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Reporters swarmed toward the front, shouting questions. "Mrs. Lane, how does it feel to win? Do you plan to pursue criminal charges? Is it true your husband's death wasn't an accident?" Audrey stood slowly, ignoring the noise. She turned to face Gregory and Victoria, the people who had tried to erase Ethan's name, who had left her alone in the snow with $1 and a house full of ghosts. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. $1, she said. Too cheap a price to pay for greed. No anger, no triumph, just truth. She turned and walked away, the crowd parting in silence as she passed. Ash and Rune followed at her side, their paws soundless against the marble floor. Outside, the cold hit her like a breath of something clean. Snowflakes drifted from the gray sky, landing softly on her coat. The courthouse doors closed behind her, muting the chaos within. For the first time in a long time, she felt light, not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had meaning. Justice wasn't vengeance, it was peace that no one could steal from her again. She paused at the top of the steps and looked out across the frozen square. The statue of the town founder stood half buried in snow, its bronze eyes dull and lifeless. But above it, the sun broke through, faint, pale, but real. Audrey exhaled, watching her breath fade into the winter air. Then she whispered to the wind, as if to Ethan himself, "It's over." Ash barked once, low and soft. Rune pressed against her leg. Together, they walked down the courthouse steps, into the white silence of Silver Pines, leaving behind the last ghosts of the Lane legacy. Spring came late to Silver Pines that year. The snow melted in hesitant rivulets, dripping from the edges of roofs and the limbs of old pines like tears thawed by sunlight. For months, the valley had been silent, a stillness earned through struggle, through loss. But now, as the first buds appeared beneath the frost, something new stirred in the air. The sign over the Rotine gates read, "Silver Pines Rescue and Veteran Center." The paint was fresh, white letters gleaming against dark oak beyond the gates. The once abandoned Lane Manor no longer loomed like a ghost. Its broken windows had been replaced, the walls painted a calm shade of cedar gray. Smoke drifted from the chimneys, the soft, steady sign of life returning. Inside, the halls were warm with motion and voices. Veterans sat at long wooden tables, hands wrapped around mugs of steaming coffee. Some laughed quietly. Others simply sat, listening to the dogs moving between them, a rhythm of paws and soft tails. Ash and Rune had grown into magnificent shepherds, sleek and confident, their coats glinting under the light that filtered through tall windows. They weren't just companions anymore. They were partners in purpose. Ash had learned to sense anxiety before it peaked, to press gently against a trembling leg, to ground someone's spiraling panic. Rune had a way of resting his head in a soldier's lap at the exact moment silence became too heavy. Too many here. Those two dogs were the first reason they'd smile in months. At the far end of the main hall, in what used to be the grand dining room of the Lane family, a new banner hung for those still fighting the quiet wars. Audrey stood beneath it, clipboard in hand, overseeing a small group as they unloaded supplies, blankets, canned food, crates of medical kits. She was different now. Her hair was shorter, her posture softer, though the quiet strength remained. The scar on her shoulder, faint and pale beneath her shirt, was a reminder of both pain and survival. Helen Crawford entered through the open doors, brushing snowflakes from her coat. "You did it," she said with a rare smile. "Didn't think I'd see this place alive again." Audrey smiled back, a calm curve of gratitude rather than triumph. "It wasn't just me. The people needed somewhere to start over. So did I." Helen's eyes softened. "You've given meaning to all of it, even the worst of it." Audrey didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to a framed piece on the far wall, a single letter, old and creased, displayed behind glass. Ethan's handwriting. She walked toward it slowly, her boots tapping against the wood floor. The letter wasn't long. She had memorized every word, but she still read it sometimes when the house was quiet. "If you're reading this, it means they did what they set out to do. Don't trust them. Trust what's buried, not what's shown. And when you find the truth, don't let it die with you. Build something new, something that can't be bought or burned." Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame, the glass cold beneath her touched. In the reflection, she could see the others, veterans talking, a young woman laughing as Rune nudged her hand, Helen pouring coffee, life moving again. She whispered softly, "I built it, Ethan, not for me. For them." Outside, the sun was climbing higher, melting the last layer of frost on the window panes beyond the glass. The courtyard shimmered, patches of earth breaking through the snow. A few early daffodils bent under the weight of melting ice. Stubborn but alive, Audrey stepped out into the yard. The air smelled like pine sap and damp soil, the scent of beginnings. Ash bounded ahead, chasing a bird that had landed near the stone fountain. Rune followed, slower, pausing to glance back at her, as if asking for permission. She smiled. Go on. The dogs sprinted into the light, snow kicking up beneath their paws. Their bark echoed through the open space shop, bright, full of life. From where she stood, Audrey could see the whole valley stretched before her, the forest, the river thawing from beneath its ice, the distant road winding toward the town. Once, it had all felt like exile, a punishment wrapped in silence. Now it was home. Helen joined her on the porch, hands in her pockets. You know, she said quietly, most people would have sold this place and never looked back. I tried, Audrey replied, half smiling, but then I realized that dollar wasn't an insult. It was a challenge. Helen raised an eyebrow. A challenge. Yeah, Audrey said, looking out over the melting snow. To prove that value doesn't come from what something costs, it comes from what you make of it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint laughter of people inside. Helen nodded. Well, I'd say you've more than proved it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight spread across the courtyard, touching every scarred wall and broken memory until it all looked almost new again. Audrey's voice broke the quiet, soft but sure. $1 start at this, she said. A single, hollow gesture meant to strip me of everything. But it gave me something else, instead, the will to rebuild, to fight for those who can't anymore. Helen smiled faintly. Sounds like the Marina I remember. Audrey glanced at her, then at the horizon. The sun caught in her eyes, turning them to molten gold. No, she said, just someone finally at peace. She turned and whistled a sharp, clear sound. Ash and Rune came running back, snow flying in arcs behind them. They skidded to a stop at her feet, tails wagging, tongues out. She crouched down, hands on their fur, and whispered something only they could hear. The dogs leaned into her touch, and for a moment, it felt like everything in the world was exactly where it should be. Overhead, the last clouds broke apart, light spilled across silver pines, touching the old manor, the people within, and the two shepherds that stood guard by their owner's side. Winter was over, and from a single dollar, life had begun again.